Streaming daily across every news outlet in the world. The new extremist group, ISIS, may sound familiar to you. They call themselves the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. We're taking a closer look into who ISIS are, how they've been connected to Minnesota, and what Muslims of our community are doing to set the record straight that ISIS is not related to Islam. I'm Rana Kamal. Our Issues Twin Cities starts now. Just when the regime of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda withered down and the reign of Osama bin Laden came to an end, another group, possibly stronger and more dangerous, has popped up from the ashes.
ISIS currently, and I personally do not like to call them that because another name common for them is Daesh. From that area. So Daesh is the name which is used for them, and Daesh are mainly based in the lands which have a lot of political history. Daesh or ISIS, coming back to your question, are number of people from these political backgrounds who are getting together in certain kind of organized way, including online presence, social media, to highlight their cause. And they are doing what they're doing, what we hear today.
We started hearing about them first in June. Why weren't we hearing about them before? Why are they now all of a sudden popping up in the media?
And a very interesting question. We are also trying to figure out that why suddenly June. Before June, it was rather a very quiet time. And suddenly they came up and they started taking over. So there are a few kind of theories around it. One of them could be that they are suddenly being supported by extra funds and money, and so they are not necessarily from the local population. They have extra support from outside. Outside can be anything. It could be Western powers, it could be local Arab regimes, it could be other countries.
Sometimes they're referred to as ISIS, sometimes as ISIL, and sometimes as IS, the Islamic State. What's the difference between each name?
And really, all of the names are wrong as far as we are concerned, because Islamic State is a very sacred and special name for a state which will be run by the rules of God, specifically God, and God being the most merciful would not approve of a lot of things this particular group is doing. But either way, ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Iraq and Levant, ISIL, or in short, IS alone. Either way, whatever they call themselves, their actions they are not really speaking of an Islamic State. So people who are joining ISIS or Daesh, we hear what kind of things they are doing, the killings they are causing, the problems they are causing, things we have not heard of from the Islam's point of view.
Why do you think the Twin Cities is such a high target for recruitment?
Part of the reason is that we are, to best of my knowledge and the numbers I've seen at Wikipedia, in Twin Cities the Muslims are highest in USA by ratio. So by ratio, the population, if Twin Cities is let's say 3,500,000 population, the 3.5% roughly of that is Muslim population, which is different than many other states. And then most of the population is young population, because in 1996 or 7, where a big number of refugees from Somalia were accepted by Minnesota and really helped out a lot by the government in Minnesota. So now those kids are growing, families are settled, and some of them are easy target.
With a large population of Muslims in the Twin Cities, the FBI has been leading a strong investigation to help stop recruitment, but often Muslims are being misled by the FBI.
A lot of times, the FBI is approaching people in their homes, at their workplace, at their mosque, and so these are private spaces. These are places where people go. They don't expect law enforcement to show up. So that's one of the concerns that we hear, that the FBI is coming unannounced, at these places where they don't expect the FBI to come.
Although these extremist groups call themselves Muslims, many Muslims across the world are horrified to be linked to the terror organizations.
Well, I think a lot of times, this is the only image people see of Muslims, and that's what's so concerning. Because if this is the only Muslim that you will ever hear about, ever see, then it changes your view of who Muslims are and what they believe.
Who are these people who can just come and kill or push the other people out? Why? How? When God had protected them for so long, and when Muslim, Christians and Jews lived in Islamic Spain for 800 years, when Muslims and Christians lived in Egypt to the point that today 10% of the population of Egypt is still Christians. If Islam has allowed all of that and churches were there, then who are these people to make their decisions? There are way too many things which are anti or against the Islam in what they are doing. So it is very easy for us Muslims to tell that what they are doing is wrong. So we are horrified by how they are representing Islam, but some blame also falls upon us when we should be speaking out against what was happening in Muslim lands for so many years. We were rather quiet. And now, as we see the revenge is coming from the next generations, now when these political situations are almost exploding, we are kind of at loss because we are stuck between these two groups. But there's still a lot which we need to do.
I think it's really important for our Muslim community to really just be ahead of it, to talk to people about who we are, what we believe, and just really define ourselves as a community. And that's what we do, a lot of that in our organization. We do a lot of trainings, a lot of outreach and interfaith events, and just make sure that our message gets out there. So when people see the news, they see these people committing horrible things in the name of Islam, they have some background. They're like, well, I know Muslims. I have a Muslim neighbor. I have a Muslim coworker. My child is friends with Muslims. So we hope people just have more awareness, just more understanding of who Muslims really are, so they can negate some of the negative things that they're seeing.
Coming up on Our Issues Twin Cities, we take a closer look at the threat ISIS has created to the largest population of African immigrants in the metro. It's been over 20 years since the arrival of the East African immigrants, and now Minnesota's home to over 30,000 Somalis. When did the first wave of Somalis enter the Twin Cities?
They arrive in America, period, really, but particularly in Minnesota and the Twin Cities after the massive collapse of the Somali civic and political life. And the decomposition of the government, the state, and then the explosion of civil war. So the date, I think, there were very few trickling numbers, I think, in the mid-90s. And most of the Somalis who are here in the Twin Cities, not all of them, but I think the vast majority have come as people who either are refugees, that's the largest number, maybe as much as 80% or more, or people who are looking for asylum. That's, I think, the primary way in which Somalis have come to the state of Minnesota and the Twin Cities.
Well, why Minnesota and the Twin Cities in particular?
Very good question. I always tell people when that question is posed, well, maybe the Somalis, without telling anybody else in the world, really enjoy ice fishing. But of course not. I think what has brought them so progressive place, where tolerance is, I think, part of the ethic of the community of Minnesota. So that's one. I think the second reason is an economy that is usually at high peak. We are almost now, once again, on the verge of full employment. So the economy works here, and even when the rest of the nation is down, it's not quite as down as the rest of the nation. So there is this positive economic activity which translates into jobs. Yeah. That's important for Somalis, like everybody else.
Now, coming from such a rich and also very strict culture, how has the integration into American society been for Somalis over the years?
The integration process, under any circumstances, is always difficult, because to move from one's own comfort zone, language, culture, geography, food, dress, everything, to another place is always a process of challenging transition, and more so in the case of the Somalis. So on the whole, the integration process for the Somalis, I would say three groups. One group a smaller group, maybe about 20 or so percent, who have become very successful. And they have now become part of the mainstream of the United States in education, in technology, in public health and medicine, to adapt to this. And they're finding difficulty in the educational context and how to get good education. So many of them in the schools are not really doing well, or their jobs, and some of them in fact have even run afoul of the law, and they are in prisons.
Over the years, we have been introduced to various extremist Islamic groups, such as Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Taliban, and now ISIS. Tell me, how have these groups created a problem for the Somali community over the years?
Big problem in many different levels. Created a problem of misperception and the immediate creation of a stereotype. That Al-Shabaab, extremely violent militant group that uses religion as a way of trying to deal with others and force. That stereotype becomes quite enlarged, and then most Somalis will be kind of a subject to that stereotype unless they prove otherwise. So that's a major problem. I think another major problem is the distortion of Islam itself. That whether it is Al-Shabaab or ISIS now or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram, you name it, these groups now have given Islam a terribly bad name. So the other Muslims who are decent, peace-loving people, Somalis and others, have to always explain themselves. And they have to explain themselves because this is their own people who are doing this. So that's another major problem. And then the danger of that ideology of violence and sectarianism that doesn't have any respect for other civilizations and other religions, that is so violent, that the danger of that beginning to, through osmosis, kind of getting inside the Somali American community. And then young people being brainwashed to think that this is the way to salvation and the way to create a better world.
Why are young Somali Americans joining groups like ISIS overseas?
For some, going to these violent groups might become a source of reclaiming of self and being somebody.
Giving them a purpose?
A purpose. Giving them a purpose. And a sense that they might be part of a long project of building a new Islamic civilization. But of course, anyone who makes even a minimum analysis of this knows that this is a dead end.
There are speculations that there is an inside man or men in the Twin Cities recruiting young men and women to go overseas and fight for ISIS. Do you believe this to be true?
It is within the realm of possibility that individuals might come, or individuals here might be recruited to play that role. It is very possible, and I think we have seen evidence of that in the case of Al-Shabaab. There are people who are in prison now who were convicted of their association, maybe collecting money and things like that for Al-Shabaab.
So in terms of, Minnesota and with the recruitments that are going on, do you think then that there is a threat here?
I think we have to always be very vigilant, as I said. There's always the probability of threat. Right. One person can make a difference in that, and what was a very stable, civilized Minnesota, all of a sudden the anxieties get compounded. So I think, yes, there's always the possibility of a threat. And that's why we have to be vigilant in at all places. So the challenge for the Somalis is how to get deeper into this state and now become citizens. And you can see some of that success because there are already successful young Somalis.
Up next on Our Issues Twin Cities, we talk to one of the founders of a local organization which aims to build positive images of Somali youth in the community. Founded in 2007, Kajug organization was formed in response to negative media attention surrounding the Somali community, such as gang shootings, drug trafficking, and other violent crimes. Today, their main focus is to provide hope and vision for Somali youth of the community.
Kajug is a Somali term, and it means to stay away and stay out, and the message behind that is to get young people away from all negative influences. whether it's youth violence or radicalization, and really put them on the right path, which is education. Our mission is very simple, making sure young people graduate from high school, get into a 4-year college, and come back and mentor the next round of kids. It was started in 2007. Around this time, there were many issues increasing in the Somali community, the disconnect between the two generations, high school dropout, and various other situations, issues. And so a dozen of young people came together and said, you know what, we're going to do something about this. And in order to tackle these issues, young people have to take ownership. And so what started as an idea to make changes in the Somali community, what started as a grassroots effort, really turned into events and conferences and into programming, and then later to organization with 3 different locations in Minnesota.
There's been young Somali men such as Abdurrahman Muhammad and Abdi Muhammad Noor who have left the U.S. to go fight for terror groups such as Al-Shabaab and ISIS. Why do you think young Somalis or young men are leaving the U.S. to go fight for these organizations?
There's actually a lot of reasons. So when we talk about radicalization itself, so it's not about just waking up the next morning and going to ISIS or Al-Shabaab. You know, this is a process. And so a lot of our young people are facing a lot of challenges that make up this bigger issue of radicalization that we see that play out in the media. Really, we're talking about lack of mentorship, the disconnect between the two generations, the lack of education. So all these things really lead up to isolation, which then turn into these recruitments. And these terrorist organizations are not looking for a particular race to target or to recruit, but they're looking for opportunities. And they see these opportunities within the Somali community through the challenges that these young people face. It really hurts the image of who Somalis are. I mean, these individuals, again, we're talking about probably less than 1% of the Somali population. But in the media, I mean, this really hurts who Somalis are. I mean, the majority of the Somali community condemn these recruitments. They don't, I mean, these are law-abiding citizens. They don't convey my image as a Somali. So again, we're talking about very small number of individuals who decided to join these groups.
Your organization recently made a documentary in Kenya. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so we had a chance to go to Kenya and Somalia, and the purpose of that was how to deter young Somalis in Kenya, deter them from joining Al-Shabaab, to stop, you know, things that, like the Westgate Mill that has happened. And so we went over there and we talked over 65 youth groups it was just a listening session to listen to what their needs are, and really we compiled that through a video. And really the end goal is to go back into Kenya, have a presence, and really provide better opportunities for young people there in Kenya and Somalia in order for them to deter them from these horrific organizations.
With the recent recruitments here in the Twin Cities, how important is Kajuj more than ever?
It's very important. It's really important because the young people that we work with are not the ones that are being radicalized. It's the young people that are being radicalized are the ones that are disengaged, not only from Kajuj, but the rest of the community. And so really for us, it's really expanding our network, expanding our reach to reach more, in order to reach more young people. So more than ever, I mean, it shows that especially ISIS, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, especially when you're against a multi-million dollar organization such as ISIS. And it's a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we have the right people and we can do it.
Like Mohammed Farah, Muslims of the Twin Cities are setting the record straight by using social media and community events to educate the general public that violent messages and actions spread by extremist groups like ISIS do not represent the religion of Islam.
There are several campaigns, you know, the Not in My Name campaign on social media. So and these have been actually going on since 9/11, so it's not anything new. And I think just getting our message out there whenever there is a hate incident, you know, the Muslim organizations, you know, I know CARE especially always condemns it, always speaks up. You know, we make it clear that this does not represent our community. And that message, you know, when you have access to more people, they might not have a Muslim neighbor, a Muslim coworker, or a Muslim student, but they do have, you know, Facebook, they might have Twitter, they can access that.
Really, the only way to counter that is fight ideology with an ideology. I mean, promoting great things, and not only that, but tackling these challenges that our young people face. I mean, there's a huge chronic of unemployment rate in the Somali community. I mean, we have to be educating our young people not only academically, but socially, but also religion as well. I mean, religion is very important, but when you don't know enough about your own religion, you easily can be influenced to join these groups. And so really trying to provide opportunities for our young people. This is one way that we can definitely stop these recruitments.
Our organization is doing a lot of outreach. We've done events, interfaith events specifically in Little Falls, in St. Cloud, in Bagley, Minnesota, Perham, some of these towns that don't have any Muslim residents. We feel like it's important for us to go out there and just have them meet Muslims. A lot of times people, meet me and they're surprised. They're like, well, you went to law school, you speak English perfectly. So it's just that basic education that, you're from Iowa, we have a lot in common. So it just starts that dialogue, it starts that conversation with people.
How important is it to help young Somalis engage in positive activities these days?
It's very important. I mean, again, because if Somalia comes to be a very safe nation, some of the elders may go back, but for the ones that were born here and the ones that grew up here all their lives, such as myself, this is my home. I mean, this is their home. They're going to be the ones that are leading not only this community, but this state and this nation of ours. And so it's very critical for us to make sure that these young people are educated enough in order for them to deter from not only ISIS or Al-Shabaab, but all gangs and various different negative influences. And so this is a very critical moment for us to come together and tackle these issues, because these are the future of the leaders of our nation.
Thanks for joining me this week on Our Issues Twin Cities. I'm Rana Kamal. See you next time.
Not in my name. Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.
Not in my name.